I understand he's played for 7 teams in 7 years. That can sound like a red flag, but don't be lazy. Dig into it. Why? What's the path there? What's his story been? He had 4 teams in his first 3 years when he was getting like 250 minutes or less each year, trying to find a spot on a team. He was just not NBA ready coming out of college. Go look at his UNLV data. Look at his G League data. Look at his early career NBA data or his film. He wasn't ready. And we can't in good faith say, the fact that he wasn't on one team and the fact that he was bouncing roster to roster trying to find a spot in the league is evidence that he's like a bad dude or wasn't trying. He just wasn't there yet. Is Alex Caruso a bad dude and wasn't trying because he was bouncing around looking for an opportunity? Like that part, I want to dismiss that. From that part moving forward, he's been with 3 teams in 4 seasons. He had a breakout year, 2019-2020. With Detroit, he was legitimately really good. The coverage on him was positive. Detroit was like, we want to keep him. We're not sure if we can keep him. That was all the coverage about him. He ended up choosing to sign a 3-year, $41 million deal with Houston. Detroit, 2 days prior to Wood's decision, had signed a 3-year, $60 million deal to go after Jeremy Grant. So it's not like they were just like, you're bad, we're going to let you walk. From everything I can tell, they did want to bring him back. Now, the next season he was in Houston, he was the 2nd best player on that team behind James Harden. But then Harden was traded earlier in the year and the team was bad. Defensively, his impact that year was really solid. And this is something that I want to point out. He has not been a bad defender every year all the time. And I know, bigs to guards and bigs and wings, not always equal from a defensive value standpoint, just role-wise, but his defensive impact that year was in the Danny Green, Dwight Howard, Alex Caruso range for the Lakers title team. He was legitimately solid and looking granularly solid in a number of different ways. And so at this point, he's gone from barely in the league to getting 3 times his career earnings at that point in 1 season, being paid more than just about anyone else on the roster, and was their 2nd best player. And with Harden then gone, he was maybe their best player, maybe their 2nd best player, but on a bad team. Next season in Houston, he was their best player, but the team was super young, was not good. Then he was traded from Houston to Dallas, and why? And I didn't just try to say, come up with what I think right now. I, again, went back and looked at articles. I went back and looked at podcasts. Here were the reasons that they, from a reporting standpoint and an analysis standpoint at that time, the reasons why he was moved to Dallas from Houston. The first thing was his age did not fit the timeline. He was going into his age 27 season. 9 of their top 10 guys in minutes that year were 22 or younger. This is a guy that's going to play well, but he's going to take reps. He's going to take shots from these guys, and that's not necessary. We don't need that. So that was the second reason. It's not just they're young and he doesn't fit the future. It's that he's stifling the future by being there. They were also about to pick Jabari Smith in the draft a couple weeks after this. They also were able to set up a bad team, a worse team, and tank for Wemby. This was part of the analysis as well. They ended up getting Amen Thompson. So those are 5 reasons right there that from a basketball standpoint, I don't care about any of the off-court stuff. There were legitimate reasons to go about this. This was not some bizarro move where it's like, well, why do you do this? Oh, it must be because he sucks or he doesn't want to practice. But then I did find a few articles mentioning that he's probably not the best, the vet presence in a room of 19 to 22-year-olds. He had one situation where after one of the Houston assistants was yelling at guys in the locker room and chewing guys out at halftime, he didn't want to play in the second half. One of his teammates left the arena altogether. It was not a good day for the team, and he was not a calm, cool, collected head in that situation. That was the example that was shown as to why, hey, maybe he's not the best veteran presence to have around these teenagers. But those were, the reasons how he got to Dallas. And then what happened in Dallas? So what I did here was I Googled Christian Wood on Google. I went to the news tab and I set the search parameters month by month in the season. So I started with October, and the October headlines were Wood playing like a 6th-man trophy frontrunner. Christian Wood has emerged as the 2nd best player on the Dallas Mavericks. Those were 2 articles on the front page there. In November, article on the 19th of November, Mavs Christian Wood adjusting to winning basketball. And it talked about how he's playing better defense and how he's really given him a boost. Tweet on the 20th. So this wasn't an article, but a tweet was a footnote from the Mavs' bizarre loss to the Nuggets. Christian Wood played a season low of 17 minutes, and people were really upset about that. Then an article on the 29th, is there anything Mavs Christian Wood can do to start? And this was, I guess, the beginning of the why the hell isn't this guy starting conversation, because he was just outplaying the other bigs they had. In December, still playing very well, still should start. Dallas needs to make a call on his extension is kind of the theme here. On the 6th of December, is Christian Wood being underutilized by Jason Kidd? On December 21st, the Mavericks must make a decision on Christian Wood with regard to his extension. On the 27th, Christian Wood is playing his best basketball and Mavs are reaping benefits. He was playing well. In January, continuing, Mavs want to keep him, trying to figure the extension out. Then he started. He began starting, and then he got injured. So on the 1st of January, Doncic appreciating Wood, who, quote, never gets mad, quote, end quote, if Luka yells at him. And they talked about their camaraderie and how they love playing together with each other. On the 4th, Christian Wood, Mavs talking extension. Dallas expected to explore trade if no deal is reached. Per report, the Mavericks have won 7 games in a row with Wood starting. And it talked about how if they can't sign him to an extension, they don't want to lose him like they lost Brunson in free agency, so they would want to move him. And that was them learning from the prior year there. On the 9th, Dallas must convince Christian Wood to sign his extension. On the 17th, quote, we like to keep him, end quote. Mark Cuban speaks on Christian Wood's impact since Mavs trade. On the 19th, Mavs big man Christian Wood sidelined with fractured thumb. So he was playing great, wanted to start him, wanted to extend him, then he gets hurt. He got into the starting lineup prior to getting hurt. The team was going on a roll, then he gets hurt. February, they didn't get an extension agreed upon, and then it's looking like he's going to walk in free agency for more money is the narrative here. He comes back from injury, wasn't playing as much. February 6th, the article reads, the article was titled Mavs Christian Wood wins Chime Community Spotlight for January 2023. Just a little side note there. February 7th, going shopping. Mavericks evaluating trade market for Christian Wood, Tim Hardaway Jr. February 14th, Christian Wood will, quote, almost certainly, end quote, leave Mavs in free agency, and it was based on a lack of playing time. He went from playing 34 minutes a game in January to 19 in February after the injury, and it was like, all right, we couldn't extend him. Now we're not even playing him. Like we started him, he was playing a bunch, it was working, and now they're not playing him. And then in March, everybody started turning on Jason Kidd, and it had been, there were some points in this earlier on, but in March, on the 6th, Christian Wood's lessened role makes little sense for Mavericks. On the 10th, Christian Wood among 3 players Mavs must play, says NBA analyst, looking at all 30 teams. March 12th, Christian Wood getting less minutes doesn't make sense. March 12th, Christian Wood versus Coach Jason Kidd. Can Mavs overcome conspiracy to save season? And it was an article about them trying to figure out why the hell isn't he playing? He's been playing better than these other guys. JaVale McGee went on Draymond Green's pod and gave a quote, if you actually understood the business, if you took the time to actually learn the business, your outlook on it would be totally different. Green said of fans and media speculating on player situations. Quote, you'll see certain things going on, you'll better understand them, you'll understand guys' rotations. All of a sudden, this guy isn't playing because he's on a contract year, and a team wants to lower his number because they can get away with it. And there was widespread speculation this was about Christian Wood and the Mavs not playing him on purpose because the season wasn't going well and they wanted to be able to keep him around. Then in April, on the 6th, Jason Kidd sends a message on Christian Wood after Mavericks beat Kings, and the message was about how he played good defense, credited him with the win, and then the Mavs benched him in the last 2 games of the year when they were purposefully tanking. Or if you remember, they were trying to make the playoffs, and it was like, oh, nope, we can't, and absolutely just tank for those final 2 to get a better draft spot. April 12th, Mavs, quote, want to keep Christian Wood, but is dynamic big man tweeting goodbye. And he tweeted out, I want to thank everyone in Mavs fans, especially for their support this season. Dallas has a special place in my heart, back to the grind. And then I looked at the end of season grade from Mavs Moneyball. He got a B grade, and they said he played like the $14 million he was getting paid. So month by month, I wasn't seeing, wow, this guy's an issue. Wow, this guy is horrible for the locker room. Wow, this guy's not trying on the court. It was, he's playing well. He needs to be starting. Oh, he is starting. We're doing really well. Oh, now we need to extend him. Okay, crap, we couldn't extend him. We need to trade him so he doesn't walk like Jalen Brunson. And all of that stuff. And some extra. Tim Cato from The Athletic, who covers the Mavs, on an Inside Mavs pod, shared that the coaches didn't want him when the team traded for him, and that it was more of a salary dump move, and that they tried to trade him immediately after they had acquired him. So just from the start, and this is something that fans speculated, the coaching staff just did not like the guy or did not want to play him. Tim Cato talked about on that pod, the funniest outcome would be a team with better coaching than getting him and getting more out of him. He said, with the right setting on defense, he can be okay, but the Mavs didn't have that. Schematically on defense, it just didn't make sense with the roster they have. On offense, the picking and popping, like we saw on the clips, like it worked fairly well. He's not the same like lob threat that like a Dwight Powell is, but like he outplayed Powell. He outplayed JaVale. Like it was a really bizarre situation. And I think in trying to rationalize things, people were saying like, well, maybe he just was awful in the locker room. But the only examples we've gotten around that have been from years ago, like the example where he didn't want to play in the second half, or he missed a COVID test more in the height of COVID. To me, things have just gotten a bit hyperbolic about how, oh, well, actually, he wasn't good and nobody liked him. Like, no, Mavs fans really liked him. The end of season analysis was he played like a $14 million player. I don't know, man. There's more. And that's just the narratives. This is before we get into any of the actual analysis, just looking at what were the narratives on him throughout the year. Because right now, the narratives on him don't match month by month by month what we just read through. And I think that continues into his defense. They were talking about, and I think part of this is just people's perception of him. The reputation is that he's this horrible defender. And so every time he's going to a team and he's not horrible, they're like, oh, wow, he's figuring it out. Whereas like in reality, this past season on defense, like I don't think he was any better than the prior year. I just think people's expectations were too low. Twitter, I don't know, Twitter's not the most reliable source for some stuff like that. He's certainly bad in some areas on defense. In others, he's good or okay, but he is just not the corpse I was expecting to watch. And we see that in the granular data, in the impact data, looking at the interior defense, looking at the percentage of shots at the rim contested and how often he guards fives. You can kind of see like, all right, when players guard fives more often, they're able to contest more at the rim. When they guard guys, fives less often, they contest less at the rim. It's kind of a role thing. He's above the curve when it comes to how active he is defending at the rim. So that's good. I think that's good. Compared to mobile bigs, he had a B- rim protection grade. Solid. Looking at the percentage of shots contested at the rim and the defensive field goal percentage versus expectations on those shots, he's in a good spot. I plotted it out. He's right next to Jared Allen, Xavier Tillman, Nick Richards, Nick Claxton, Clint Capella, Isaiah Hartenstein, Al Horford, and Anthony Davis. He's not an elite rim protector, but he's worlds away from being the horrendous rim protection that LA saw with like Thomas Bryant. And I just think, he was lower than AD in this, but he was close to AD in this. But in terms of just like being able to actually rotate and contest shots and disrupt shots, we could do a whole lot worse. He's not bad. Diablo's better, but it's not like this guy is Carmelo Anthony trying to defend the rim. I think fans would be pleasantly surprised, and we'll probably see articles about, oh, wow, the Lakers coaching staff is getting him to be a good defensive player and all this stuff, just because expectations are crazy, crazy low. Now, somewhere that he has gotten much worse is his post defense. He had a B+ grade in the 2019-2020 season and the following season, then a C+ and a B-. He had an F this past year. We know he can be better here. He was bad. We know he can be better. From a defensive rebounding standpoint, he's going to be an asset. Woods crashing and, winning of contested boards is solid. A- grades, and both of those compared to his peers. His box out rate is low. And this is an area that for the Lakers, it's actually higher than most of the Lakers players this past year, just because LA didn't box out much at all. And it was really frustrating to me. And then watching the finals, you're like, wow, look, Miami's boxing out all the time. Denver boxes out really often. LA did not do it much. So it's not like differentiatingly poor compared to the Lakers team. But I also wouldn't expect it to be better unless the Lakers coaching staff is coaching to it, which they weren't. It was low versus anchor bigs versus mobile bigs, but not for the Lakers roster. So this is, I don't know. I think this speaks to, if LA wants to coach to this, they should be able to hold him and others accountable. His defensive rebounding talent grade of a B- against anchor and mobile bigs is exactly where JaVale's was the title year. It's not dominant, but it's pretty good. And I think from an impact standpoint, just with how Powell was a better rebounder and how he didn't box out much, whereas the other Mavs guys boxed out, the team was worse from a rebounding standpoint when Wood was on the court this past year, when he was that sole anchor big. And I just don't think that's a great way to use him. But I understand how within the context, he was very negative there, and that contributed to the team's defense being worse when he's on the court. At a minimum contract, there's only upside here. If he, with all of the, let's say all of these things are true and he's got these faults and he's not working hard, he still was, according to our math, a $10.5 million player last year.
And Bismack Biyombo has not and will not be a $10.5 million player with how bad his offense is. Even with his defense being, having an outlier good year this past year, just the upside is just not there with him. It's not there with these other guys that we'll mention. He's played in one winning situation his whole career. I don't think that's his fault. And at the min, looking at like even his help defense, looking at, again, looking at the trend line between what guys' jobs are and how often they're helping, he's above the trend line. He's helping more often than we would expect. How does this culminate on defense? His overall impact was not good this past year. The 3 years prior, as a mobile big, his Z LeBron value, that defensive impact, was average. It averaged out to be just about exactly average for a mobile big. And in 2 of those 3 years, he was above average. So he's this horrible, horrible defender that can't do anything. That's not reality. He had a bad year this past year. The seasons before that, he was, he wasn't an anchor big. He's not a drop coverage big. It's kind of the same sort of thing with, I'm going to make the Jokic comparison in that Jokic hasn't been a good rim protector. Therefore, the perception of Jokic's defense by many is that this guy can't guard. This guy cannot defend. Wood also similarly is not an elite rim protector, but he's been good in some other areas. Rebounding solid. Rim protection actually okay as a 4. Pretty strong as a 4. As a 5. Perimeter ISO defense is okay. Post defense, bad. It's been better. If he's not a 5, it doesn't really matter. His drop coverage, not the best way to use him. His mobile coverages, I have more comfort there. And he's got a bit more mobility. He's got some athleticism. But can the Lakers successfully bring in a guy who's had issues buying into a smaller role? This is something that there's been speculation about. This was the Dwight Howard situation. When the Lakers acquired Dwight, you remember how prior to coming to LA, it was this guy needs to stop being a post scorer. He's not that guy anymore. And LA got him to buy into a role. So we've done that. Memories can be short, but LA's done that. And they did that with Frank Vogel, who, doesn't have the commanding presence that Darvin Ham has. So maybe he could do an even better job. Other question you can ask, can the Lakers bring in a guy who's had character questions? Well, yeah, they did that with Malik Monk. Malik Monk wasn't available because he wasn't good at basketball. Malik Monk was available for other reasons. And the Lakers took a risk. They took a gamble on a risk and brought a guy in who had questions that several teams were like, we will not touch this guy. We don't think he'll be able to be allowed to play in the league if he slips up one more time. And LA took that gamble and it paid off. This is a different situation than what Malik had going on, but in Dwight, to a degree, same sort of deal, but this isn't new territory for the Lakers. Understanding there's a floor and a ceiling for each setup, I'd say LA's better set up to win a title with Wood. And I think you have to chase ceiling to a degree. And even with all those things we talked about, Wood was generating $10.5 million worth of value. Reeves generated $10 million this past regular season. Dwight and JaVale, the title year, were $8 and $9 million range. As some inflation, it's probably around where Wood was this past year. Yes, he hasn't played in the playoffs, but I don't know. Once you get past, 8 months? 8-month-olds have object permanence. So if anyone's struggling with object permanence, give it a couple months and you'll be able to see things. You'll be able to think through things you haven't seen before. I don't think it's, insane to try to project how a guy who can play mobile coverages and space the floor and potentially can play alongside AD offensively could work in a playoff environment.